Hello everyone and welcome back to another Marvel Crisis Protocol Battle Report. Today for you we have 17 threat of the Black Order versus Uncanny X-Men on a new Asgardian themed map. Well, sort of. Pseudo-Asgardian themed map, which will hopefully look pretty good. So without further ado, let's get things started by looking at the two teams fighting each other today. So a little bit of an odd mix in the Black Order team this time around. No Proxima Midnight, no Corvus Glaive, being led by the Mad Titan himself, Thanos of course, with Black Dwarf, his bodyguard, with Ebony Maw, his scheming friend, and then one of his adopted daughters, Nebula, and their tactics cards are Mothership, Price of Failure, Field Dressing, Blood Despair, and Medpack. And here we have the Uncanny X-Men. Cyclops and Storm are both here, but it will be Storm's leadership ability being used for the affiliation. So once per turn, an ally within 2 can be moved 1. And more importantly, everyone outside of 3 getting attacked, or 2, I've forgotten now offhand, is counted as having cover, because she's providing Storm cover. So yeah, Storm is the leader, Cyclops is also here. We have the Punisher just filling out the rep, and, sorry, wrong game, threat. And then we have Beast. And then we have Wolverine, and the tactics cards on offer for this side are First Class, which will be getting played in Battle Round 1, just in case it's forgotten to be mentioned prior. Children of the Atom, Blood Red and Personal, Exceptional Healing, and Brace for Impact. And you will have already seen the objective markers on the table, but just to be clear, the extraction is Struggle for the Cube continues, so that's the 5 cube fragments. They hurt you at the end of a turn if you have any, and you score 1 victory point for each one you have. That's the threat value that's being played as well. And then Mayor Fisk vows to find missing witnesses. I don't know how the witnesses ended up in Asgard, but they apparently are. So there's 2 witnesses. This was mistakenly done wrong last time it was played. The witnesses are not picked up. It's the only civilians in the game that are not pick upable. So you just have to secure them. You score 2 victory points if you do, but they can also run away at the cleanup phase and potentially stun people as well. And if we just quickly take a look. Cube fragment. One of the witnesses. Cube fragment. That cube fragment is technically smack dab in the middle, so anyone who gets close enough to the sides of the statue are just going to count as being able to pick it up. There's the other cube fragment, the other witness, and the final cube fragment right there. And with that, we'll come back at deployment. So here we are at deployment. The Black Order are on your right, the Uncanny X-Men are on your left, and it will be the Black Order who are taking first activation. And as previously mentioned, First Class is being used in this initial power-up phase for the Uncanny X-Men, so it doesn't apply to the Punisher, because he is not an Uncanny X-Men, but the rest of them can interact with an objective in turn 1 without having to spend power, which is good for them. So if we take a look, Nebula and Black Dwarf are together here, we have Thanos right here, we have Ebony Maw up by himself over there, and then for the Uncanny X-Men, Punisher and Storm, Beast in the middle, and then Cyclops and Wolverine over there. So with that, we are ready to jump into Battle Round 1 and get things started. So it was the Mad Titan himself, Thanos, that activated first for the game, moving forwards twice for his activation in order to snatch up the middle cube fragment, which could be the casting vote in who gets the most victory points here, because obviously there's an uneven amount of cube fragments to grab. So he's snatched it up, and well, he has exposed himself in the middle a little bit. He's using the statue for cover. We'll see what happens now as the Uncanny X-Men get their first activation. So Storm was the first to activate for this side, and she first of all made use of the first part of her leadership ability. It does not specify it has to be an Uncanny X-Men, it just says an allied character. So Punisher was moved forwards 1, which is just like an inch, so it's not very far, but he was moved forward an inch. Then for her first move, she went over this. She can fly, so she easily just hopped there. She would have paid 1 power, but because of Uncanny, or First Class rather, she picked it up for free. Thanos was out of range of her Thunderbolt, which is range 4. If it was range 5, I think it would have got him. So she just double moved and is now sitting next to the civvy that came out of that house there, apparently. Black Dwarf was next up. He only moves small, but of course he is on a Hulk-sized base, so he still clears a lot of distance. But he moved once, paid his 1 power to pick up the cube fragment that was to the side of that house, and then just moved again because his basic attack is only range 2, so he can reach anyone. So he is now also contesting this protection target against Storm. Punisher can definitely still move in and give them priority, but he is obviously a threat. Forgot to mention at the top as well, but Nebula cannot contest or hold objectives, but she does extra damage to anyone who is doing so. Wolverine was next up, and it was pretty much the standard first turn play when this objective is in. He moved once, he paid 1 power, he picked up the cube fragment, then he moved again, and he is now securing the other witness on the opposite end of the table. Nebula activated. She moves long, but she only made use of 1 action this turn because she doesn't want to reveal herself to get shot by the Punisher. So she moved up to the other side of his house, and she is hiding behind it, again ready to strike next turn because she does extra damage, or rolls extra dice rather, against anyone who is holding an objective. The Punisher had little choice but to double move for his turn as well in order to give the majority holding on the witness over here, because obviously him and Storm outweigh a very large Black Dwarf, and then it is just over to Ebony Maw to end off the turn for the Black Order, and then back over to Cyclops and Beast for the Uncanny X-Men. So Ebony Maw went round one side of the house, this side that's hard to get an angle of, paid 1 of his 3 power because he generates 2 extra, to pick up the cube fragment that was there, and then rather than go after the witness over there, which Cyclops can easily counter his presence, he fell back towards Thanos, hoping to, I guess, secure this end of the table instead. So we can just cover those last 2 Uncanny X-Men activations, because all they did was double move forwards, or, well, Beast didn't quite do a double move, but he got in behind the statue. Cyclops moved up once, but his optical beam is just range 4, so that wasn't enough to reach Ebony Maw, so again he just kind of slightly moved forwards for a second action. And that does take us to the end of Battle Round 1, so we'll be back in a second to work out victory points, apply damage, and move the witnesses too. So there is a lot to cover in the cleanup phase. First of all, each witness can be moved by the Black Order because they didn't hold either of them within 2 of their position, and then anybody within 1 is hit for 1 and stunned. So Storm and the Punisher both took 1 damage and were stunned, and then also because Storm has a cube fragment, she took 1 damage from that and will generate 1 more power. Black Dwarf, because he has a cube fragment, same with Thanos and Ebony Maw, they all take 1 damage and will generate 1 extra power. And then over here, Wolverine, he takes 1 damage and would be stunned, however he is immune to it, so that doesn't apply. And then he also has a cube fragment, so he's taking 1 damage. 3 cube fragments go to the Black Order, but no witnesses, so that puts them at 3 victory points. The Uncanny X-Men have 2 cube fragments for 2, and they held both witnesses for 2 each, putting them at 6. And with that, let us go into Battle Round 2 with the Black Order going first again. So Black Dwarf got things started, and he was within 2, so no cover applied. He did his basic attack on Storm. It did 2 damage to her. He then spent 2 on his throw attack, whatever that was called, to pick her up and chuck her at the Punisher, which would have been enough to daze her, but instead Brace for Impact was played, so she and the Punisher both spent 1. Characters do not suffer damage from this collision, so that kept her conscious, hopefully long enough to have an attack. For his second action, he moved so that he is securing this weakness, because there is a good chance that Nebula will be able to take out Storm. So Storm did activate first in Battle Round 2 for the Uncanny X-Men. She did not move, she stood her ground and unleashed lightning bolts. The first one was just a basic lightning bolt, 4 energy attack directly into Black Dwarf. It stunned him from a wild and did 2 damage. She then spent 3 power on Eye of the Storm, which just adds 2 dice to her next attack. So she did another lightning bolt, that one struck him, and it also did 2 damage. Coupled with the 1 damage he did to himself from having a cube fragment, he is now on 1 health remaining on his healthy side. So we're staying over here because Nebula was next up. Her first action was to swing around the corner of the building there, lying in wait. She then spent 2 power on Medpack to heal Black Dwarf for 3. Allied character within 3, he obviously is, so he's been healed for 3, so he's back on 2 damage. She then did her basic attack on Storm. I misspoke earlier, I thought she got extra attack dice against someone holding or contesting an objective. She just rerolls her attacks. Either way though, with the reroll, she did well. 3 damage, more than enough to take Storm out, so she is dazed and will be flipping her card at the end of the turn. Now Nebula can't pick up, well she didn't have any power left anyway, but she also couldn't pick up objectives in general, so the cube fragment has been put 2 away from Storm in that direction for potentially Thanos or Ebony Maw to grab it. So seeing an opportunity, Beast activated. He moved up medium on his larger base, paid 1 and picked up the cube fragment that dropped. He then, because he was within 3, did his basic attack on Black Dwarf. Black Dwarf fully blocked it, however there was a wild in the attack roll which triggered ambush, so after it's resolved, Beast is allowed to be placed within 1 of the target. So he has been placed there in order to be contesting the civvy that's there. the Mad Titan himself, Thanos, activated, and he used the Cosmic Portal to move Ebony Maw within 2 of his current positions, so that's why he has been shifted. Then he did a movement action to where you can see, and then he did, for his actual second action, a Cosmic Blast with 2 extra power pumped into Frank, because Frank doesn't have any cube fragments, so it was just an attempt to do a lot of damage. All said and done, only did 2, it would have done 3, but it got reduced. And on that note, it is worth mentioning that up until this point, totally forgot that, well, was remembering Thanos, but he hasn't been hit. Black Dwarf, of course, reduces damage by 1, to a minimum of 1, every time he takes damage. So technically he shouldn't have been receiving as much damage as he did. It still probably would have been the best move for Nebula to use the med kit when she did, because otherwise he would have been downed. So we're just going to play on, but it was forgotten. Ebony Maw doesn't have anything like that, but he and Thanos do. And Thanos is not to a minimum of 1, so if he only takes 1 damage, he will take none. It doesn't apply to the cubes damaging them, I think. It's purely enemy effects. But yeah, that was done wrong for Black Dwarf. It has been caught now. Med pack rather still would have been used, so hopefully it all balances out, because he's back to basically being healthy. But yeah, that was a mistake. So it is getting quite messy over here. Frank Castle, the Punisher, activated. He did not move, he just kind of turned around just to look more dramatic. He shot his assault rifle at Nebula. He gets a free second shot. All said and done, it did 2 damage. So he spent 3 power on Warzone, so a scenery element within 4 of him that's also within 1 of an enemy explodes and deals a flat 2 damage to them. So that is enough to daze Nebula, and it specifically says for Warzone it only targets enemy characters, so even though Beast was also within 1 of the rock that was here, he presumably he knew to get out the way. So Ebony Maw was once again the final activation for the Black Order, leaving Cyclops and Wolverine for the Uncanny X-Men. He moved forward, then he used Telekinetic Powerhouse to pick up the house that was there, because it can do size 4 or less, and it's size 4. Chucked it at Frank Castle, because Storm technically isn't on the field right now because she's dazed. He did okay with his dodge roll, but not enough. It did 3, exactly enough with the damage he already had, so that Frank is dazed. He didn't have a cube fragment or anything, so he's just dazed and will be flipping his card. Then for his other actual action, because Telekinetic Powerhouse is a superpower without the action keyword, he used Black Tongue on Beast, who was there. He got a wild, so he was allowed to move Beast small away from the civvy, more importantly, so Black Dwarf is currently the one holding it, and did no damage, but because of the wild was able to move him there. So let's see what Cyclops and Wolverine do to end the turn. And so we can quickly just cover their activations now as well. Cyclops moved forwards ever so slightly, so moved medium, and then he shot his optical rays at Black Dwarf. It only did 2 damage, down to 1 because of his roll that's now being remembered. So he's back to 3 damage on him of his 6 on his healthy side, but Cyclops couldn't do anything else. And Wolverine, in order to score points, couldn't do much. He just moved so that he's closer to the fray a little bit on this side. At the end of his activation, he healed the 2 damage on him, so he's back to full health as well. So at the end of Battle Round 2, the Black Order still managed to hold on to 3 cube fragments for 3 victory points, and they now held one of the witnesses who was there for 2. It has since been moved by the Uncanny X-Men to there, so Black Dwarf has taken 1 damage and is also stunned. The Uncanny X-Men have 2 cube fragments for 2 victory points. Wolverine was holding this one, which has also been moved, but again has hit him for 1, but he's immune to stun, so he just takes the 1 damage. As we do move into Battle Round 3, it will be the Black Order going first again. Everybody who has a cube fragment is getting 1 additional power and taking 1 damage. So that's everyone except Nebula for the Black Order, and then just Wolverine and Beast now for the Uncanny X-Men. And everyone who was dazed is flipping their card. I think that covers everything. Oh, the score as it stands is 10 to Uncanny X-Men and 8 to the Black Order, so they are catching up. So getting back to only being 1 HP away from being knocked out, Black Dwarf felt it best that he activate first in Battle Round 3 for the Black Order. He spent 3 power on Brutal End, his 8 physical attack. Storm did massively well with her defense, so only did 2 damage, no wilds to get the stagger either. So then he did a basic attack. It would have done 4 damage, but her defense roll was fantastic and had 2 crits in it, so it only did 1. That does put her at 3 already on her wounded side, and I think she only has 5 HP. Like, Storm is... Her leadership ability is so good, but I can't stand how weak they made her. But anyway, she's hurting, and now it's over to the first Uncanny X-Men activation. So Storm activated knowing that she may not be long for this world, and she tried to do as much damage as she could. She flew closer to the objective and between Nebula and the Black Dwarf to do Hurricane her area 2 around her. and it does more damage to people with fly, but that doesn't apply here. Either way, it did 3 damage to Black Dwarf, which was enough to stun him, and the cube fragment has been dropped there. Sorry, it did 4 down to 3, to be clear. 4 down to 3. And it also did 2 damage to Nebula. However, Blood Despair was played. When a Black Order character would be dazed, they can spend 3 to play this card. They immediately perform an attack before getting the dazed token. If they would heal in some fashion, they are not dazed. And he also, it just says attack, it doesn't say a basic 0 costs. So he spent 4 on another Brutal End just to guarantee, well, try and guarantee damage on Storm. He only ended up doing 2 because her defense roll was great again, but that is enough to take her out. So Storm is gone. She died doing that. And that does also mean that the Black Order are immediately scoring a victory point because of Thanos' healthy side affinity bonus, putting them at 9. Nebula activated and did a Shock Sword Assault on Beast, which also allowed her to be placed closer to him afterwards. The first one only did 2, so then she did her Energy Pistol, because Beast only has 2 energy defense. It did much better, got a couple of crits. It did 3, so Beast is dazed, so he has also dropped his cube fragment there, and will not be getting an activation this turn. Nebula can't pick them up even though she has the power to do so, because she can't hold objectives. So the Punisher activated, and in a desperate attempt to try and recoup things over here, he shot his assault rifle rapid fire twice into Nebula. All in all, it did 2 damage. She isn't dead though, because I forgot to mention in her turn she automatically heals 1 damage from her cybernetic enhancement, so she's got 1 health left. He then generates 1 power, and he had 1 power. He moved and he picked up both fragments, so obviously now he is the main target of the other 2 Black Order members who are going to be charging in on him. But if he lives, he'll be able to gather some last minute victory points for them. Ebony Maw activated and he spent 4 on Herald of Doom, range 4, which did reach the Punisher. It did 3 damage and also involved a small throw, so he was thrown that way towards them, at which point he then also used a Black Tongue and it did 2 damage. He could have been moved again because there was a wild, but it didn't matter. Frank Castle is down, so that is a victory point for the Black Order, putting them on 10 as well, I believe. They're even with the Uncanny X-Men now. The 2 cube fragments he dropped, he had 2 power to pick them up, so Ebony Maw is currently holding 3 cube fragments. Cyclops activated and spent all the power he had on Optic Devastation, his Beam 5, and he fired at Ebony Maw, but Thanos was caught in the crossfire. Thanos took 3 reduced to 2, Ebony Maw took 2. Which isn't great considering how many dice were rolled. He spent 2 to use his Mystic Defense. He then fired a normal Optical Blast at Ebony Maw, and Ebony Maw again spent 2 to get to use his Mystic Defense of 6, not 5 if I said 5 there. So he's taking 2 damage. That does still mean he will die when we get to the power phase of turn 4, but by then it might not matter depending on how the rest of his turn goes. So the Mad Titan was a little miffed by getting shot by a gigantic death beam, so he fired a Cosmic Blast back at Cyclops. Normally 5 energy, he pumped 3 power into it to boost it to 8, and as you can see it did really well. It just insta-dazed him by doing 6 damage. He then just moved medium for his other activation for this turn, so that he's within 1 of that civvy, and it is over to Wolverine to end off the turn already because everyone else is dazed. So there isn't anything Wolverine can do, unfortunately. He just moved again, so he's within 1, so he's still claiming that. But due to the Black Order just absolutely destroying the X-Men this turn, I think the game's over. So this is the state of the board at the end of only turn 3, and Ebony Maw, once we get to the power phase of turn 4, would insta-daze and drop 3 cube fragments, but it actually doesn't matter. Uncanny X-Men have 1 cube fragment on their person currently on Wolverine, who's unfortunately had to stay at the back for the whole match, so he didn't get to do anything. And they held that civvy over there, which again haven't been moved because it doesn't matter anymore. For 2, so that was 3 victory points, putting them at 13. Like they were getting victory points pretty steadily, but the Black Order got 2 victory points this turn from 2 people getting taken off the table, thanks to Thanos' healthy side affiliation bonus, Storm and the Punisher. They have 4 of the 5 cube fragments for 4 victory points, and then Thanos at the end there is the only one securing this because Black Dwarf is dazed and Nebula can't, and Beast is obviously gone, giving them 2 more points there, putting them on exactly 16. So the Black Order have won on the end of turn 3, 16 to 13. So it was looking like the Uncanny X-Men had a very comfortable lead early on in this match, but the Black Order were just able to absolutely stomp by quickly snatching what they could from one end of the table and then focusing their efforts on the other to just try and pile on the ones who'd been split off. And it worked. Storm not being as good as she should be probably helped as well. Her affiliation bonus wasn't as great as previously thought, because the Black Order members taken for this particular team, they don't really care about range. They're all getting within 2 anyway, so cover, I think it only mattered twice for Punisher at the end there, and once when Nebula shot at Beast prior to going near him. So it didn't really kick in as much as it should have, or could have, had like Proxima been taken instead. Speaking of which, this is the first time Black Order team has been done like this, taking Black Dwarf and Ebony Maw. Usually it's like it's Thanos, Proxima, Corvus, one of these two, and maybe 1 or 2 Infinity Gems depending on the threat level being played. First time seeing Thanos with these two, and then Nebula thrown in to fill points as opposed to taking Infinity Gems. If this was an 18 point match, 19, 20, you could fit in a couple like the Reality Stone or whatever. It's okay. I'm actually surprised at how well they did. Obviously they focus on killing, and they have a lot of manipulation, like Thanos can move his teammates around, Ebony Maw can obviously pull people towards him by twisting their ear. So yeah, I know Ebony Maw plus Corvus, Corvus plus Proxima rather, is a very potent combination because they can activate in tandem, but these two together work pretty well, I think. But anyway, that's just one match, obviously, it's not a... things worked out in their favour. There was a lot of good dice rolls that went in the Black Order's favour. So anyway, that is going to do it for this one. We'll probably stay on this Asgardian-esque map next time for 2 new teams. Maybe the Asgards will actually come, the Asgardians rather, will actually come back and defend their homestead, because the X-Men tried and the X-Men failed. Hope you enjoyed watching regardless. Thank you for doing so, and see you next time. Ta-ta for now.